Hey there, John.
Hi,
Hey,
Ryan.
and here we are for another episode of the Socratic. Today we're going to be talking about an article that's titled "AI is Destroying the University and Learning Itself." You want to tell us a little bit about the article, John?
Yeah, it's by a guy named Ronald Purser. He is a professor himself in the California State University system, and he wrote this article for what is this currentaffairs.org, basically raising his concerns about AI and ChatGPT and that sort of thing, as it pertains to education and or specifically higher education and in the university setting. We'll kind of go through some of it. We'll obviously have some quotes, some different things we'll talk about. Obviously, as always, we'll recommend that you read this article for yourself. We'll have the link to the article with the video so that you can obviously read it and form your own opinions and follow along with us if you want. But we're going to kind of just go through and give our thoughts.
Yeah, very good. And well, I mean, both of us spent unfortunately a long period of time in higher education, right? I spent 8.5 years in college. 6 years for you? Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
think
and you, I mean, I
yeah,
finished,
between
I
undergrad and
guess
masters,
almost,
yeah.
I guess a decade ago now, and you just finished up, so you might have some,
Just went back with
yeah,
my
yeah, so
masters,
you might have
yeah.
some better insight as to, what's going on with ChatGPT at the university and the grad school level right now. I'm sure we'll get into that as we discuss.
Yeah, I can definitely provide some anecdotes for
Sure.
sure. All right. Well, I guess we'll just kind of dig into the article. We obviously aren't going to cover everything in the article. It's a very long article, but I had several things I kind of noted throughout that I thought were interesting and worth discussing further. I'm sure you did as well. I guess we can go ahead and get
Yeah.
into it. The first thing that I noticed for sure that really struck me with the article is that we kind of have something that's going on here simultaneously. We have a lot of layoffs that are happening in academia, and we're cutting back. Actually, this again for personal anecdote purposes, the U of A, University of Arkansas, was cutting back the number of instructor positions that they have, and they're trying to do more things with grad students teaching them and stuff. But mostly they're trying to find ways to cut their costs of paying teachers and things like that. They're obviously also reducing even tenure track positions. Sometimes they're getting rid of whole departments, just all kinds of stuff.
Scary.
But as this article is pointing out, this is kind of being coupled now to all of a sudden this surge in AI spending. Universities are making big contracts, big deals with these AI companies as they're making all of these cuts to quote unquote the more traditional methods of education, and there seems to be a certain, maybe not necessarily irony, but just it seems very sad and disconcerting that we're replacing real people with more AI and bots here, even in higher education, where maybe at one point it would have seemed like that might have been a thing that might have been more difficult to do, but it doesn't seem to be at this point.
Yeah, and there's a transfer in the knowledge infrastructure at that level, right? Where traditionally, like you're saying, we have professors. I'm an educator. I teach day-to-day high school level, right? And in my experience, some professors are better at the education aspect of things many professors are there for their research, and perhaps aren't the best in terms of like their pedagogy. But regardless, that's like a human interacting with another human, a human who has like actual real lived experience in the field that they're discussing with the students, and transferring that knowledge to students either through tutoring or teaching or mentorship. And that's now being transferred and outsourced out to this, algorithmically derived chat bot, which which has several implications to it, right? And I don't think the article or the author or necessarily like anyone is really necessarily linking those two things. It seems like the reduction in teaching staff and resources and programs at the university level is kind of happening. Not because of the rise of AI, but it's just kind of a
certainly
consequence
predates
of
it.
The commodification of higher education, right? And that couples very well with this whole with ChatGPT and AI and outsourcing the knowledge infrastructure over to corporations.
Yeah, and that feeds in very well actually to a point that I'd like to make that's definitely addressed for sure at a minimum quite tangentially in this article, but maybe not like absolutely expressly on the head. It's not like the pure purpose of this. But I think we should make the point that a lot of the problems with academia, especially the ones that we have, hello Asiago, a lot of the problems that we have, they do predate this new round of AI. So some of this is, some of what AI is doing, in my view, is exacerbating trends and things that have already been in academia for some time, decades really, in fact. And so some of the things that Purser brings up in this article, for instance, he quotes a guy, Henry Giroux, who referred to basically universities now as vocational feeders for private markets. And he was talking about how basically the language of revenue is, more and more becoming a part of universities. They're talking about things like deliverables and, these kinds of like outcomes. Like they've started to basically incorporate more and more of the business language, like the capitalist kind of drive into higher education, which obviously I think both of us think is a bad idea. In my opinion, I believe yours as well, education is one of those things that really shouldn't be for profit, at least not directly in the way that we would think of it in normal business terms. Obviously, I think we would both agree that education does have a lot of value to add to a system, to a society, creating, certainly more talented or skilled workers, better citizens, things like this. And a lot of those things will have like actual number, ways to quantify them down the line, but it's more of they pay off in the future, by creating, better, more able, workers and members of society. It's not something that, should be thought of in as such as like, we're putting this in and we're getting this money back like right now. It's more of an investment in the future.
Which is, and I think like probably a testament to that, right, is the fact that most developed countries have, socialized or public schooling, right? So that's something that's that traditionally in modernity has not been left up to market forces. Obviously, there's often a private school system or ecosystem that exists alongside the public education. But most developed nations and most societies agree that we want some way, some mechanism to produce good people, good citizens, and people that are capable of critical thinking, and that is a worthwhile investment for the nation, society, culture, whatever, right?
For its own
sake.
For
its own sake.
Just on its own.
Yeah, full stop. Yeah. And then also, knock-on effects economically and, productivity-wise, right? So there's so many benefits to having a well-educated population. And yet we're seeing this turn in neoliberalism and these market forces with AI and all that where we're kind of turning away from that, right? Or at least we're seeing that a lot in America, and probably elsewhere as well, but probably to less of an extent. And
yeah, because I mean, places like Germany and other places in Europe, higher education is either dirt cheap or outright free, right? Some of these countries even pay some type of minimal stipend to students, or provide them like very low cost, like housing or other things that make being a student of higher education a much easier proposition.
Right, and I come at this again from like a K through 12 educator's perspective, right? And I think that higher education is, kind of another aspect of that, right? And so you want people to have a basic education through like your K through 12 or whatever that looks like in your given country or society. And then obviously the option to pursue further skills and further, liberal studies at the college level, at a higher education level. And many countries have it so that, that's easier to do. And, not to get too far ahead in the article, but at the very end of the article, he talks about his, I think it was Sonoma State University where he went in the 80s. He talked about how, it was like $670 for a yearly fee, and other than that, you didn't pay tuition on like per credit or per class. And so it was very easy to go and become a well-rounded human and get these rewarding years that everyone pretty much agrees. Like, college is one of the most like formative experiences for many people who are, able to afford it.
Able to go,
right? Yeah. But now, so just listening, that there's like the last couple paragraphs hit hard for me, where he discussed what college used to be, and it was very clear that at that point, given like the low barrier to entry and like the freedoms you had to actually pursue your education without the distress of the cumbersome debt, and the necessity to work like multiple jobs while you're there, that's really what the vision of higher education should be, and we've gotten far from that, right, since the 80s. And this is just another another nail in the coffin here, but it seems like we've been moving in the wrong direction for a long time, and this isn't going to help things.
In this vein, one of the things that he talked about in the article was academic capitalism and knowledge refashioned as commodity and students as consumers. And I thought that seemed very, very... I guess actually that was Sheila Slaughter and Gary Rhodes had that line. And I think that has, again, that is something that predates by some decades this rise here of ChatGPT and these things just here in the last few years. But obviously this is now like kind of exacerbating a existing trend and probably taking it to new heights of just honestly in some ways it feels kind of stupid for reasons that we'll get into here in a bit, because of like basically the implications of what this means. One of the things that the article pointed out was, and this again was already happening prior to ChatGPT, but we're losing more and more of the humanities, even at the University of Arkansas. They've mostly just been losing history professors, and they haven't really been hiring a lot of people to replace them. Or maybe they hire one new person, but they, 2 or 3 former tenured professors retired. And, now they're not replacing one for one, So these departments, especially the humanities, and like the social sciences and stuff, are starting to get, they're taking this hit more and more, and sometimes whole departments are being cut, or at a minimum they're, being way understaffed. And one of the things the article is bringing out is, of course, the implications that this can have for democracy, because as we were saying, one of the goals of higher education, especially in a democracy, is to create, better, more informed citizens that can participate in, democracy, to the degree necessary. This is, I think, our issue at large with capitalism kind of taking over everything, all fields and sectors, and kind of coming into some areas where it wasn't in the past. Even in our capitalist society, there were still things that were more left outside of the traditional market, and it seems like it's being taken over more and more. And one of the things that you can't exactly quantify is something like creating better citizens and having a functional democracy. And you look at the political situation currently, and I think it's very easy to argue that we're not in a great place as a democracy at the moment, and how much of this is because it's not just enough to ask how to do something or how much money does something make or whatever. Sometimes we need to ask questions like why, or should we be doing these things, or there are other important questions to be asked besides just does this make money, or can we do it. Sometimes we should probably pause and say, should we do it,
Right, and what are the values that this institution or this project is like oriented towards, right? And ultimately, if you allow, the forces of capital in, then generally all those values orient towards profit motive, right?
Profit.
That's when you get reduction in teaching staff because we're trying to cut costs, right? That's when you bring in AI because that's a new service we can provide. And then obviously you lose sight of the other values that we originally had for these institutions, for this project of higher education.
And prior to ChatGPT, I think a lot of that was occurring in fewer tenure-track professors, hiring more instructors to teach courses, to teach a lot of courses, but obviously they're maybe not getting the same kind of depth and quality that tenure professors potentially would have had. And now, of course, it seems like the next step could be having these like chatbots almost teach a lot of these like courses and stuff, and maybe moving them further and further away from, even real people teaching these things. One of the quotes he has: "Universities no longer ask what education is for, only what it can earn." That's kind of what we were touching on with this idea of, is it a good idea to just have a pure profit motive for everything? Obviously, we pretty categorically reject that idea. Yeah. One of the other things I found quite interesting in the article was he talked about the irony of they're getting rid of some of these programs and departments that would actually be best positioned to study the impact of AI. So it's like, one, we're just kind of bringing AI in more and more, but now we're also getting rid of the people that could possibly be telling us whether or not this is actually a good idea or not.
Right, or directing it in a manner that is more pedagogically sound, right? Because, in the article gets into this, right, that these AI companies are not educational in their nature, right? They're taking and they're retrofitting or marketing a product that is not built for education and just pivoting it to education because they see a market there, right? It's not because they think necessarily, and, I don't want to...
This is good for learning.
Exactly. We don't know what's in their hearts and souls, right? But I think we could say with pretty good certainty that they're not there just because they think that their product is good for learning, right? They're there because they see the dollar signs and they see the market of college students and I guess college professors to an extent, and universities. And the article mentions this at least a few times. The other irony here, which is that the university, or at least like the California State University system that this article is kind of centered around, is paying for a product that is not only disassembling the whole educational institutional project that CSU is, but also that everyone can use for free anyway. So what is the point here? I don't know.
And two, along with that, I would say at best, the usefulness of these things as educational tools is maybe a secondary concern at best, but obviously the primary concern with any capitalist corporation is always going to be profit and how much money it makes, and so the rest of it be damned, right? Like, if you happen to get one that also is good at, teaching or something, that's more of like an accident or a lucky benefit or something as opposed to the goal.
Right. And I'm open to perspective to say, like, a corporation like an AI corporation is going to be profit seeking, right? And, it's kind of up to the higher educational institution to either welcome them onto campus, which seems to be what CSU and many other universities are doing, or to come at that with a more critical lens and kind of meter how they're going to roll that out, or how they're going to allow staff and students to interact with artificial intelligence. Now, obviously, I think we both think that there also should be some responsibility on corporations, or at least some governance over them, oversight. But the article brings up how it is the fault of the administration ultimately that AI is being so intentionally welcomed onto campus and so directly implemented into programming.
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
reducing all of those things like staffing and actual programs at the schools.
Yeah, and I think that's clearly like, treating universities like a business, like a for-profit business, as opposed to, something that should be pretty much outside of a profit model.
Right.
That the universities are thinking in, this is one of the quotes from the articles, in efficiency metrics instead of educational purpose. It's like everything is becoming now about, the bottom line, how to make money, and they're more and more adopting this language of corporations, in order to do that. One of, I think, the particularly interesting points this article made, because I know we'd read some things in the past, we had some discussions prior about, are we just being Luddites? Are we just, being like, some kind of old school fuddy-duddies that, don't want to embrace, new tools? Are we Socrates complaining about the use of writing, or people complaining about the use of calculators, or, many of these other tools that have come about throughout history? But Purser here has some kind of interesting takes on like what the difference are between tools and technologies. These are a couple of quotes, but tools help us accomplish tasks. Technologies reshape the very environments in which we think, work, and relate. We don't just use technologies, we participate in them. And he says, like, with tools that you retain agency, like when and how you use it, whereas technologies remake the conditions of choice itself. And I think that's kind of like a lot of the concern that he gets at throughout. He kind of comes back to this a lot. But it seems to be that what ChatGPT and these other AI tools are really good at is taking the place of thinking. Right. It's no longer requiring the person to put in the effort and the time and the hard, the hard hours, wrestling with ideas. Now you just write a prompt and you get an answer spit out for you. Then of course, where does that answer even come from, right? I mean, like, these AI models are training themselves on all things written on like the internet and stuff. So like ultimately some of it probably goes back to people, but obviously, as we know, like algorithms can be manipulated and directed for the benefit of like corporations and things like that. Like, how do we even know, just because ChatGPT spits us out an answer, is it correct? Is that the way we should think about something? Like, are we just going to outsource basically all of our thinking, from our own brains to, what this, AI robot is kicking back to us? How do we know that, does it have our best interest in mind? What values can, AI even have? Like, what values, if it, has some programmed in, what are those? Do they align with our values? Like, all these kinds of questions.
And who's us, right? Is it the people that control it, that own it, or is it like, the broader humanity or the students that are adopting it, anything like that? It opens up a whole bag of worms. All right, and the article at some point mentions how we're, as you said, we're offloading our ability to think into these AI models, the AI systems, right? And so when we have this reduced capacity to think for ourselves, and when it becomes the case that to do anything creative or do anything that involves critical thought, we need to go to these AI as an assistant to help us do those things, then we're now, rather than having this internal capacity ourselves, we are outsourcing that, right? And that outsourcing is not unbiased, right? It is controlled by this corporation. Obviously, the AI models are developed, but there's a couple things that happen when they're developed, right? Which is they aren't really intelligent. They're prediction models, right? So they're predicting what a response would be to your query based on the aggregate popular responses that are out there, right? So there is like an average to, or a retreat to the mean there, right? So essentially, whatever is already in the majority will continue to be the majority. And if we're then outsourcing all of our thoughts to that, then that gets internalized into everyone, right? The minority gets winnowed out, any minority opinions, which kind of ties into the fact that like all these departments of things that like the capitalist class or the neoliberal project don't really think are important. Things like gender studies, African studies, philosophy, all those sorts of things are getting hollowed out at the institutional level. And then as we individually offload our thinking into this machine, we're going to hollow ourselves down, our capacity to do that. And then so the models are trained to go towards whatever the mean is, rather than like different flexible, different and exotic ways of thinking, which obviously are important for creativity. But then also there's like that control aspect, right, where the companies clear. I think it would be naive to assume that they don't exert any amount of control over what these models use as their values, or how they kind of navigate some responses in one direction or another, right? So if all of our thinking goes from an individual thing to a collectively centralized location of these AI models, now there's a centralized area where control can be exerted, right? And if we're influenced by that, that trickles down to who we are, right, and how we think, which is probably one of the most important aspects to our individuality and our identity. It's alarming.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to encourage like groupthink, like even more and more. Everybody is just going to go to these like sort of sanitized, almost like focus group created like ideas or whatever, right? That it doesn't seem like that'd be a good thing. This might be this is a little later in the article, but I just figured this because we kind of are talking about the damage of like what this does to our ability just to think in general. So later in the article, it mentions that when you use these things, there's a 47% drop in neural connectivity. 83% of the people that use these tools can't recall the key points of what they've quote unquote written, compared to 10%.
Right, not even just what they read, right? What they quote unquote wrote, right? What they quote unquote produced, right? They obviously didn't do any like actual writing, but you still feel like if you like curated this response, you should have absorbed. Maybe if you crafted and synthesized some amount of information into a response, right? That you submit somewhere, be it your job or to a professor, that you should have some idea of the content that you like synthesize and use to craft that response, right? The fact that it's not just like, oh, like, hey, AI, summarize this article for me, and you don't absorb that. Like that seems intuitive, right? That you're no longer doing the reading, the wrestling with the information. But the fact that you're like crafting something and you still aren't absorbing anything, that's crazy. That means we're doing nothing in terms of our mental processing as we perform these activities, right? And obviously, learning happens when things are difficult. If everything is easy, you're not increasing your understanding of everything. You're just operating within what you already understand, right? So if all of these activities that people are doing through AI are easy, that means we're not expanding their understanding or their knowledge or their intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And that's scary.
And that was compared with like 10% of people that actually wrote like the essay or whatever themselves. So like clearly, if you like actually do it, like you're going to be much more likely to, remember the points. And actually, anecdotally, I got a friend who is getting her PhD in psychology, and she teaches some of these like undergrad courses and stuff. And she recently had a case that illustrates this perfectly, where she read an essay or a research paper or something, and was like 99% confident that the kid hadn't actually written this, and had used one of these tools or whatever. And what she did was she had a meeting with the student and just asked them literally what did they write about, like what were their points, and the kid had nothing.
What was the topic?
Yeah, I couldn't remember. And it's just like obvious, like in that case, well then clearly the kid didn't actually write. He probably barely even read what ChatGPT spit out or whatever.
Even read. And, I don't know if that's like a general level class or like a higher level class, but it kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, which is that like there has been a hollowing out of the purpose of educational institutions, like, the preceded artificial intelligence, right? A lot of students have gone into their gen ed real world studies classes or even their major courses and thought about this as a box to check on their way to a degree that will get them a job, right? Not as some sort of holistic learning opportunity for them to grow as a person, or to understand how the world works, or
learn some new
experience things
facts
they hadn't yet experienced, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not for them to become a better person, it's for them to get a degree so that they can go pass on in this capitalist system to get a better job, right? They exchange that for a better job. And so the fact that now they're just automating that is not surprising, right? I think it makes it worse, right? That drive towards towards many students anyway, to treat this as a means to an end rather than education being an end itself in and of itself. But it's not something that's new, and it's something that has been plaguing higher education for a long time.
Well, and to some degree, probably even education in general, because a lot of how we educate is teaching to tests, right? What's the classic thing? People like cram, the information for the test, and as soon as they take the test, they forget it, right? So, and obviously test taking and that sort of thing long predates any of this. But I guess, before some of these tools, there was at least a chance that some of these things probably seeped in. If you actually had to write your own shitty essay, maybe you didn't care about it, but you might have at least had to do some research and look up some things and do some writing.
Exactly. All these things, essays, tests, projects, all those things are tools to get you to perform in a way that will force you to understand the material, right? And there are ways to resist that, and there are ways to embrace it, right? And many students are going to resist it, other students are going to embrace it, and you're going to have a spectrum, right? But now we've come up with a way where the resistance of it is purely frictionless, where you just simply plug it in as a prompt into ChatGPT, and then it spits out a thing, and then you go and you turn that over, you pivot, and you give that to your professor, right? And perhaps your professor had taken on a new class, and they went into ChatGPT and asked it for a slide deck or for an assignment, and they pivoted and they gave it to you. And then you go, you give that to ChatGPT, then you take the product, you give it back to them. It's all just a conveyor belt of AI. It's kind of like the apocalyptic vision or the dystopian vision that this article, and it's not alone in that, but that this article, posits could be the case for higher education, right?
Yeah.
It certainly seems like we're moving further in that direction than we would like, and further in that direction than we had been moving even, prior to all of this, which we all recognize, the value of education was not necessarily what it should have been, even prior to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, one of the things it brought up the analogy of the Ouroboros or whatever, the snake like eating itself.
Yeah.
That basically in some cases, AI is writing an essay that a student turns in, and then a professor might even be using AI to grade that essay, and it's like basically the humans are no longer like even involved in any part of the process.
Right, it's the AI creating something that then the AI creates a response to. It's the humans are the intermediaries. It's two Furbies talking to each other is what it is.
Yeah.
And then a couple of people going in between. And then I guess tens of thousands of dollars of debt generated from that.
That's the other thing. one of the other interesting things, also like an Ouroboros in this case, is the fact that basically this cheating gets easier with these tools. Then the university in some cases will be concerned about that, and so then they hire the same AI companies that created the cheating tools to now create some type of bot that catches the cheating, and so like they're just getting paid on like it reminds me a little of there was that movie from, I don't know, like the mid-aughts with Nicolas Cage called Lord of War, and he was like an arms dealer, and he was simultaneously supplying both the rebels with their weapons and the government that was fighting the rebels with their weapons. And so he was just like profiting off of like both sides of the equation. And it feels to me like this is exactly like what we have like going on here.
And like that, the AI companies are just profiting from both sides.
Yeah, they're just raking it in, you know.
Raking it in. Yeah.
A few other points kind of in vein with what you talked about, how unloading this kind of stuff later, basically how it cheapens like what we're doing, that we're actually not really like improving like our brains and our cognitive ability. He gives the analogy of like if like just moving weight in a gym was like the only goal, you could come in with like a forklift and start like doing the work or whatever, lifting all this weight, but of course you're not getting any of the actual benefit from that. As you were saying, like you're taking that resistance out of it, and now you're not getting that at all.
Right. The work of being in the gym or lifting weights is still being done, right? The same thing with ChatGPT writing essays or producing slide decks from the professor's side, right? There still is content that's being produced, but the point was never the content that was being produced. It's the internal skills that are gained from producing that content, right? Yeah. And that, of course, goes along with there is a criticism from the student side that some of these tasks are not necessary to our learning, right? Some of them are busy work. And there is some amount of that no matter what's happened, no matter what educational institution you're at, right? They're never going to be 100% of all of the tasks that you do are entirely meaningful. But, they're all, no matter what, if you've written, as you write these essays, you're developing skills. As you do these projects, you're developing skills. As you take a test, you're internalizing some amount of understanding, right? Even if some portion of it evaporates afterwards, you have gained something from that. At least we like to think. Yeah,
and one of the things he said was that we have now some early research that people write worse on their own the more they use ChatGPT. It basically, our brains...
Which, does not seem surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. Our brains are learning not to learn. There is a term, cognitive debt, that basically we're mortgaging our future cognitive fitness for short-term ease. Is exactly like what you're talking about. If you take that resistance out, sure, it makes it easier. Maybe we like that in some ways because obviously we can be lazy and why stand when you can sit and things like that. So it's in our nature very much to gravitate towards a lot of these things, but it's exactly that resistance, exactly those difficulties that is what actually makes us learn and like improves our abilities to think and reason.
Yeah, so there's like the value aspect, right, which is like, what's the point of doing all these activities? And it's to, increase our skills, increase our intelligence, just increase our thoughtfulness, our capacity for critical thought, our capacity for empathy, our capacity to be better people, right? I forget what I was going to say. I lost it.
I was going to say, big thing when he talks about it seems like this is really what we're teaching kids at this point, is we're teaching them how to prompt GPT, but then if you ask them like a question like about what they believe on their own, then they no longer know how to like answer that. Like we're creating people that only know how to create these prompts to ask the AI.
It's hollowed out. Yeah. And if you think in the short term, right, they're like, if you want to call it survival instinct as a student or just short-term thinking, they want to get the marks to get the degree, to get the job, right? So there are short-term gains. The problem is that all these things, there's the value aspect, right, which is what we really want from this, which might be different from, what someone coming in to acquire a degree for a job might want. But there's also the distance in time where we start to see the consequences of this, right? So both at the individual level and at the more social, society level, right? So for an individual, you're obviously thinking in the moment, like, I want to get back to the party, I want to get back to the video games, I want to get back to my sports that I play. Let me pass this essay, prompt it through ChatGPT, and then give it back to my professor. I get back to the things I want to do in the here and now, right? Obviously, that is shortchanging the value of what should be the value, I guess we think, and maybe the student doesn't agree, but what we think the value of like going to a higher education institution is, right? But eventually, they're probably going to find that in the job that they, use ChatGPT to pass through to get the degree, to get the job for, they don't have the skills they thought they did. And maybe ChatGPT ultimately ends up making up for that, right? And we don't actually need skills in the way that past societies did or past people did, perhaps. But, no matter what, ChatGPT is going to need an editor, right? To know if the response you're getting from ChatGPT is accurate, you need to have the understanding of the material that you're querying about. And we don't have that anymore, right? So we can't just offload all of it to ChatGPT. And then when you think about like the social level, if AI doesn't make up for all these shortcomings, then we're producing a generation of individuals who are no longer capable of what past generations were capable of, right? And again, like you said earlier, we could be Socrates, that is crying afoul about about writing, right? Which, going back, it seems like systems of writing were a net gain for humanity. Maybe artificial intelligence ends up being that as well, right? But I don't. It's difficult to say if it's a long shot or a short throw, but it is at this point definitely uncertain that will be the case, right? It is very obvious what we're sacrificing, right? We're sacrificing our capacity to think critically, to be creative, and to just be more full internally than we would be otherwise, right? So that's the problem. Is the future what artificial intelligence can do for us is very uncertain. What we are losing right now is pretty obvious. And problematic. And
one of the things that he kind of talks about, this is kind of what we've been hitting here, but there is, I think, even from my own journey, through my 20s and stuff, I spent the better part of a decade trying to figure out what my own beliefs and ideas were about politics, the world, religion, philosophy, all of these things. And I spent some sleepless nights where I was wondering about these questions and I couldn't get to sleep. I had lots of uncertainty. I read all of these different, works of philosophy, economics, political theory, all these different things. And it is uncomfortable for a while, but he kind of talks about how, like, you need to endure that discomfort of the doubt and the confusion, because that's how you end up finding your voice and your own like ideas on the back end. It can be like a rigorous and at times not fun process, but there is something. I think I am better for having gone through it.
Right, yeah, and that's how one becomes like a fuller and deeper personality, right? And without that, you kind of question what sort of people are even generating in this like AI enabled world, where everything seems certain because all you have to do is ask the AI genie, like, hey, what should I think about this? What should I think about that? And it'll give response to you. And if there is no gray areas, it's all black and white. It's all very well outlined. This is the truth. This is gospel that AI gives you. And all we have to do is think at these surface levels. And how do we develop as humans to be full and deep characters and have full and deep and meaningful lives? And again, like all these questions were probably asked at the printing press, the writing systems, the internet when it first came out of the scene, and we're still here. And I guess we would say that we're not any less full, deep, or meaningfully realized than like past generations. But I guess the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we'll never. I don't know, but we'll see how all this turns out, I suppose. But it seems like, again, the the drawbacks are certain, are obvious, and then the future is uncertain. So maybe we should be walking this through a little bit more carefully, which is another thing that the article, hit on at several points, that the developers of the artificial intelligence are kind of upfront about how, like, you know what, we're just going to throw this out there. We're going to build the plane as we fly it. And that's actually how this gets done. It's a Silicon Valley mentality of you move fast and you break things, right? The problem is that it could be society and our own like inner lives that are the things that are broken. So it seems like we should have a little bit more caution, trepidation towards that than we're certainly giving it at this point.
Yeah, I would say one of the big things is that we are kind of treating college kids in many ways as guinea pigs in real time, as they, do this, are using these tools that, again, like, they didn't ask to be born at this particular time, with these tools coming about as they are going into college and changing the way things are done. And, maybe I think probably they're not getting out of their education what, honestly, even the two of us got just, with our undergrad like 10 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago now, that we, got, and they're kind of, it's like we're running an experiment on them sort of in like real time, and like the damage could be quite long lasting. Like, if they, are significantly worse off than, people of a slight generation ahead of them even, then, we've set them up for some type of failure moving forward into the future, that, they didn't really have a lot of, say in the fact that this just got rolled out, and, they're the lab rats.
Yeah, it's disheartening, right? And there are obviously some consequences we can see in the here and now, like the reduction in writing capacity, the reduction in recall of what was quote unquote written, and just a reduction in like skills and performance. But like the meaningful consequences we won't see for a while, right? There's going to be a distance between the feedback of what are the consequences of what's happening right now and our actions in the present. And so it does seem like we need to deal with this whole artificial intelligence thing, which is restructuring, how we interact with knowledge and how we interact with one another in a much more cautious manner.
It's back to that difference between tools and technologies, that technologies reshape the very environments in which we think, work, and relate. Like it goes beyond just, like using a stone knife or something that our hunter-gatherer ancestors used.
Yeah, a tool is something you pick up and you put down, right? And a technology is something you live in, right?
And it does feel like the damage is likely being done. We won't, like you said, we won't necessarily know about it for some time to come, and that's obviously disconcerting for many reasons.
Yeah, I mean it's totally disconcerting. So I don't know. Let's all right. So I think we have a lot more to talk about with this article. So we'll kind of finish this video off there, and we'll continue this in a part 2.
Sounds good.